All right, hello everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Lakeview Cemetery tour. Again, my name is Catherine Mercer. I'm the Museum Education Coordinator for the Town of Windsor Museums. And if you caught part 1, you know we ended off our story thinking about where the halfway homestead land ended up. And that story has to do with the family that we are standing at now. And that is the Dickey family. I will hold up a photo here so you can see them. We have Robert Smith Dickey, his wife and his children there in the photo. And we are standing at their final resting spot. So they have a monument stone here, and then we have Robert, Ella, his wife, and then their daughter Gladys Dickey on stot. So their son Donald is not buried here, but their daughter Gladys is. So what is the story of Robert Smith Dickey, and how exactly did he help shape the town of Windsor? Robert Dickey's story begins in 1860 when he was born in Flat Prairie, Illinois, and he was the oldest son of the Dickey family. They were a farming family there. And Robert Dickey remembers that one of his earliest childhood memories was sitting in his front door and watching families that were emigrating out west in their wagon trains, and he remembers seeing boys that were his age herding cattle around their parents' wagons as they were all on their way out west. And I think this image really stuck with him. He was always interested growing up in coming out here to the west, and in 1883 he ended up coming here to Windsor where he had some cousins living. So when he arrived in 1883, Windsor was still very new. So when the Wellers got here, the people we heard about in part 1, the town was not laid out yet. When Dickey arrived in 1883, the town had been laid out the year before. So we did have a couple of streets. We had Main Street, Walnut Street, and Elm Street. So a couple streets here in Windsor. Some houses and buildings were starting to be constructed slowly. So there was some activity going on in Windsor. And Mr. Dickey realized that, hey, there's a lot of families here and they are in need of a teacher for their local school. So he became one of Windsor's very first school teachers here in town. He taught at the original Whitney School, which was then located at the corner of 2nd and Walnut Street. When he first started teaching here, he only had 31 pupils, and he remembered later in life that most of them came to school on horseback. And then we know that by 1884 he had 45 pupils in school. So the town was growing, and he was part of that growth, giving parents the reassurance that there was a good teacher here teaching in the schools when they got here. So then in 1885, Mr. Dickey became partners with someone named Fred Weller, which we heard about in our last stop, who was the son of Julius and Margaretha Weller, who started one of Windsor's very first stores that became the Windsor Merchandise Company and later the Windsor Mercantile. So he became a partner in that company, and eventually Fred Weller decided that he wanted to become a full-time storekeeper. He actually ended up trading or selling his land where the family lived to Mr. Dickey for Dickey's share in the store, because Dickey wanted to get out of the store and Fred wanted to be more involved. So they did kind of a trade, and Mr. Dickey started realizing, oh, I think farming's really fun and I think I want to try that out. So he began farming out on the property. He started living out there, we think around 1890-ish. And around this time, now that Dickey had land and he had a good job, he was looking for another thing, which was a wife. Yes, the newspaper reports in great detail on all of Dickey's movements. So he was seen at this church social, he went to this social club reciting this play with such and such. So everyone's very interested in his matrimonial life or lack thereof. And in 1890, a woman named Nancy Ellen Smith moved to northern Colorado to attend what was then the State Normal School in Greeley that would become UNC. And she went there to the very first year that it was actually founded to study teaching there. And after graduating from there, she moved here to Windsor to also become one of our early Windsor teachers. She had been born in 1866 in New Bedford, Ohio. So she and Mr. Dickey were of a similar age. And we know that by 1893, Dickey, who's still a teacher, he's farming, but he's also teaching, and he's also involved with the school board. And at one of these school board meetings, he runs into Nancy Ellen Smith, who sometimes went by Ella. I think that's actually, yes, her headstone says Ella. So even though her name was Nancy Ellen, she went by Ella. So they ran into each other around and about as they were teaching, and they must have fallen in love kind of dramatically, because in June of 1893 it's reported that Ella takes off during summer vacation to go home to her family in Emporia, where her aunt lives in Emporia, Kansas, and lo and behold, the newspaper reports that a couple days after Ella ends up leaving town, Dickey packs his bags and he gets on the train and he follows her to Emporia, and there he must propose, and they fall in love and get married, because 2 weeks after his departure from Windsor, Dickey and Ella are reported as being married. They got married in Emporia and had their cemetery there. So they took a honeymoon to Chicago, maybe to visit the World's Fair, which was then going on in Chicago that year. And they also visited southern Illinois, where Mr. Dickey had grown up, and then they came back here to Windsor. In 1894, their first daughter Gladys was born, and in 1900, their son Donald Dickey was born. And Mr. Dickey continues to be a very successful farmer here in Windsor, also becomes involved as the principal of the Windsor schools, and later on becomes the superintendent here in town. So we know that they were very successful, so successful that in 1907, Mr. Dickey actually ended up building a beautiful house on the Halfway Homestead property, and you can still see that house out there today. It's the white house that you see in that photo. It is still there. And when it was built, it was considered to be one of the very best houses ever built in the history of Windsor at that time. It had remarkable amenities for the time and was very widely reported on in the newspaper. So Dickey did have enough wealth at that point to build this beautiful house, which does still survive to this day. But unfortunately, life was pretty difficult in the early 1900s, even if you had a lot of money, particularly because we did not have the level of medical care then that we did today. And we know that Ella Dickey was frequently sick throughout her life. She had several bouts of scarlet fever. She was very, very, very ill. We know that in 1907, Mrs. Dickey is hospitalized in the Windsor Hospital, or in Park Hospital in Denver, sorry, the Windsor Hospital was not built yet. The Park Hospital in Denver several weeks for an illness. So the newspaper never specifies what she's ill with. She's just always ill, sort of in very bad health after her early bouts with scarlet fever. In 1908, Mr. Dickey becomes one of 4 officers of the Farmers Bank. And in 1909, he's voted in as a local school director. So he still becomes very involved in the school, even as his wife's health continues to decline. In 1912, she's reported as being seriously ill in the Windsor Hospital. And in 1913, the Windsor newspaper, which was called the Windsor Beacon, reports that Mrs. Dickey is now an invalid and is unable to leave her house. So we're not quite sure what her illness was, but she was unable to leave. She still remained active in Windsor social life, so she helped run social clubs and garden parties together at their home with her daughter Gladys. Also in 1913, Gladys, who I have a photo here who I will show you, and this photo will give away what occupation she decides to go into. Gladys, maybe because she had spent so much time taking care of her mother, was inspired to become a nurse. So she graduated from Windsor High School and then received her nursing degree from CU Boulder, and in 1928 actually ended up becoming a nursing instructor at the Colorado School of Nursing in Denver. And she was very active in sort of research involved in nursing too. In the 1920s, she also visits Alaska, where she does a report and study on the health of gold miners there. So very intelligent and interesting woman. Donald Dickey, meanwhile, graduates also from Windsor High and then goes to CU Boulder. Gets a master's in engineering and becomes a very wealthy petroleum engineer out in Los Angeles. So both of the Dickey children are doing very well. Mr. Dickey in 1925 gets a car, so he is seen motoring around town, and his wife Ella continues to host various social events at their house until 1930, when she passes away. So she was the first member of the Dickey family to be buried here at this plot. And Mr. Dickey, after Ella passes away, travels a lot to visit his children until he also begins to become in bad health. And then starting in around 1940, his health starts to decline. He's been a very busy person teaching and farming and being very involved in the social life of Windsor. And then something terrible happens in 1941 when Donald, who has become an engineer, is very involved in the war effort and is under a lot of stress with all of the engineering that he's doing and manufacturing that he's doing for the war effort. He's under so much stress that he actually ends up passing away from this stress on December 4th of 1941, only 3 days before Pearl Harbor happened. So you can imagine how poor Mr. Dickey and Gladys were feeling that week. So Donald passes away in late 1941, and Mr. Dickey, Robert, comes back here to Windsor, and he is pretty sad and he's not in very good health. So Gladys actually ends up quitting her nursing job to come back here to Windsor to live full-time with her father. So just because she's now living full-time with her father doesn't mean she gives up her nursing endeavors. She's still very involved in the nursing community and continues to do research and writing and gives lectures. And then in 1944, Gladys decides that her father is feeling well enough to have a beautiful anniversary party, even though Nancy has been dead for 14 years. But a lot of townspeople still come out for this anniversary party out at the Dickey homestead. And then interestingly, in 1946, Gladys marries George Onstott, who is a Windsor barber. She is 52 years old, and this is her first husband. She's been so involved with nursing that she really didn't have any time to get married. So now she marries George Onstott, and he was a barber. He ran a barbershop at 411 Main Street, which is a building that is still here in Windsor today. George had been married before. His first wife, Mabel, died in 1942, so Gladys was his second wife. And even though George has lived in Windsor since the 1920s and has 2 children, their marriage announcement is really interesting because it talks entirely about Gladys and her accomplishments and the many places she has traveled and worked, and the only mention of George is that he is a barber here in town. So kind of an interesting marriage announcement there. But shortly after they get married, Mr. Dickey's health begins to decline more. In 1953, he actually ends up breaking his hip, and he is hospitalized down in a hospital in Pueblo. On June 25th, 1953, R.S. Dickey actually ends up passing away down there in Pueblo. So Gladys has him brought back here to Windsor, where he is buried here in the cemetery next to Ella, who had passed away 23 years before him. So they were finally reunited here in the cemetery in 1953. And Gladys and George continued to live on the Dickey home farm, as it was then known, until 1970, when George passed away at the Dickey farm. Shortly afterwards, Gladys moved to a retirement home in Greeley, and she passed away in 1976. When she passed away, she left a portion of her estate to CU to provide financial assistance to nursing students, but then she also left the family farm to a family who had been tenant farmers and farmers for the Dickeys for a number of years, called the Jacobys. And their farm became known as the Jacoby Farm, and today now is the Jacoby Farm subdivision in that area that's surrounding the halfway homestead. But I mentioned that Dickey had a huge impact on the town that we can still feel today, decades after he passed away. That's because he loved history and he really valued learning here in Windsor. He helped support our school system, and he also saved the halfway house, our 1873 stagecoach stop built by Mr. Hilton. He appreciated history, and he decided that as the road was built out, he wanted to save the house. He ended up having it moved so that it could be saved. So because of Dickey's actions today, we can say that we have Windsor's oldest historic building remaining in this area because of what Mr. Dickey did. So thanks to him, he helped found our schools and also protected some of our earliest history here in our town.